The mist clung to the ancient pines like a shroud, heavy with the scent of damp earth and forgotten blood. Under the fractured light of a waxing moon, the forest whispered secrets no human ear could decipher, rustles of leaves that sounded like sighs, branches creaking like old bones. 19-year-old Elara moved through it all with the grace of a shadow, her bare feet silent on the needle-strewn ground. She was an Omega, marked by the pack's disdain since birth, her scent too soft, her strength too yielding. But tonight, the wild called her name, pulling her deeper into the vale where the trees twisted into impossible shapes, their bark scarred by claws from battles long faded. She'd slipped away from the pack's encampment at dusk, the alpha's guttural warnings echoing in her mind. Stay within the wards, pup. The silent ones hunt beyond. But the pull was stronger than fear, a thread tugging at her core, woven from dreams of silver fur and eyes that burned like embers. Elara's breath came in shallow bursts, her heart pounding against ribs that felt too fragile for the weight of her curiosity. The air grew colder, laced with a metallic tang that made her wolf stir beneath her skin, restless, yearning. Ahead, through the fog, a shape materialized. A wolf, larger than any she'd seen, its coat the color of storm clouds, padding silently along an overgrown path. It didn't glance back, didn't growl or bare teeth. It simply moved, as if the forest parted for it alone. Elara froze, her pulse thundering in her ears. Omegas weren't hunters. They were the hunted, the ones who mended wounds and bore the pack's burdens. Yet here she was, drawn like a moth to flame, her body leaning forward before her mind could protest. The wolf paused at the edge of a clearing, where moonlight pooled like spilled silver on a ring of moss-covered stones, remnants of some elder circle. Perhaps a temple to the moon goddess, long before the packs fractured. Elara crept closer, her fingers brushing the rough bark of a tree for support. Up close, the wolf's presence was overwhelming, a quiet power that hummed in the air, vibrating through her bones. Its eyes, when it finally turned, were not the feral yellow of a common beast, but a deep, knowing gold, holding the weight of centuries. She should have run. Every instinct screamed it, the Omega's curse of submission warring with the spark of defiance she'd buried deep. But those eyes held her, stripping away the layers of doubt, and in that gaze she saw not a monster, but a mirror, a reflection of her own hidden wildness, the part of her that dreamed of leading instead of following. The wolf turned away, vanishing into the underbrush with a flick of its tail. Elara's legs moved on their own, carrying her after it. Branches whipped at her face, drawing thin lines of blood that mingled with the mist on her cheeks. The forest thickened, roots snaking across the path like veins pulsing with dark life. She whispered to herself, "What are you?" But the words dissolved into the night unanswered. Deeper in, the trees gave way to ruins, crumbling spires of stone etched with runes that glowed faintly under the moon, half swallowed by ivy and thorns. This was the Forbidden Hollow, whispered about in pack tales, a place where alphas had fallen and omegas had risen, only to be crushed by their own kind. The air here hummed with old magic, thick and electric, making Elara's skin prickle. Her wolf whined inside her, urging retreat, but the silent wolf's trail was fresh, paw prints pressed into the mud like invitations. She stumbled into the heart of the ruins, where a cracked altar stood beneath a canopy of stars. The wolf was there, silhouetted against the stone, its head lifted as if scenting the wind. Elara's breath caught. Up close it wasn't just large, it was regal. Every muscle coiled with restrained fury. She reached out a trembling hand, not to touch, but to feel the aura that radiated from it. Ancient, unbroken, alpha in its purest form. "Why do you lead me here?" she murmured, her voice barely above the rustle of leaves. The wolf's ears twitched, but it offered no reply, only a low rumble that vibrated through the ground. In that moment, Elara felt the first crack in her resolve. The Omega's chains loosening, stirred by something primal. She'd always been the outcast, the one who healed the wounded after hunts gone wrong, her touch soothing even as the pack sneered. Her mother had died, birthing her, leaving whispers of a curse, an Omega born under a blood moon, destined to upend the packs or drag them into ruin. The wolf began to circle the altar, its movements deliberate, and Elara followed, drawn into the rhythm. The mist swirled thicker now, carrying echoes of howls from distant hills, rival packs perhaps, or ghosts of the fallen. Her mind raced with fragments of lore. The silent wolf, a legend said to wander the borders, seeking the one who could break the cycle of endless war. Omegas weren't supposed to believe in such things. They were meant to serve, to submit. But as she watched the creature, a heat built in her chest, her veins igniting with unfamiliar fire. Suddenly the wolf stopped, its body tensing. Elara sensed it too, a shift in the air, sharp and predatory. From the shadows beyond the ruins, eyes gleamed, 3 hunters from her own pack, their scents unmistakable, laced with aggression. They'd tracked her, as alphas always did with wayward Omegas. The leader, Thorn, stepped forward, his beta wolves flanking him, fangs bared in the moonlight. "Elara," Thorn growled, his voice rough as gravel, "you've strayed too far. The Alpha commands your return." She stood her ground, heart slamming, the silent wolf now between her and them. Hackles rising. For the first time, fear twisted into something sharper, defiance. The wolf let out a soundless snarl, a mere baring of teeth that sent the betas flinching back. Thorn's eyes narrowed, confusion flickering across his scarred face. "What sorcery is this?" he snarled, advancing. But the silent wolf moved like liquid shadow, positioning itself protectively before Elara. She felt it then, a bond, fragile as spider silk, linking her to the beast. Her fingers itched to shift, to let her own wolf free, but Omegas didn't fight, they endured. The standoff stretched, tension coiling like a spring. Thorn lunged, claws extended, but the silent wolf met him mid-air, a blur of fur and fury. Claws raked flesh, blood spraying the altar stones. Elara cried out, the sound raw and unbidden as the fight spilled into the mist. She backed against the altar, her body trembling, but her eyes never left the wolf, her silent guardian fighting for her as no one ever had. In the chaos, as Thorn's betas circled, Elara felt the moon's pull intensify, her blood singing with power she didn't understand. The ruins seemed to awaken, runes pulsing brighter, and deep within, her wolf howled silently. This is only the beginning. The silent wolf would lead her to truths that could shatter everything or forge her anew. But for now, survival was the only destiny that mattered. And as the battle raged, Elara whispered a vow to the night. "I will follow, no matter the cost." The clash echoed through the ruins like thunder trapped in stone. Fangs snapping against fur, bodies tumbling over cracked flagstones, slick with dew and blood. Elara pressed her back harder against the altar, the cold marble biting into her skin through her thin shift, grounding her as the world blurred into snarls and shadows. Thorn's betas circled like vultures, their eyes glowing with the pack's unyielding hunger for control. But the silent wolf was a storm unto itself, untamed, unyielding, its massive form a whirlwind of grey muscle that bowled one beta aside with a single swipe, sending him crashing into a thorn-choked wall. Thorn recovered first, rolling to his feet with a guttural roar. Blood matting his dark fur along his flank. He was the pack's enforcer, broad and brutal. His scars a map of victories Elara had once stitched closed with trembling hands. "Filthy stray!" he bellowed, lunging again, claws aimed for the wolf's throat. But the silent one dodged with eerie precision, its golden eyes never leaving the threat, and countered with a bite that clamped onto Thorn's shoulder. Bone cracked, and Thorn howled. a sound that twisted Elara's gut, equal parts triumph and sorrow. This was her pack, her blood, twisted by the same chains that bound her. The second beta struck from the flank, jaws wide, but Elara's cry shattered the air before it could connect. "No!" It wasn't a command, not from an Omega, but the word carried an edge she'd never heard in her own voice, raw, laced with the moon's rising fire. The beta faltered, ears flattening, and in that hesitation, the silent wolf pivoted, slamming into him with the force of an avalanche. Fur flew, and the beta yelped, retreating into the mist with a limp that spoke of shattered pride. Thorn staggered back, shifting mid-retreat to his human form, naked and heaving, his face a mask of rage and disbelief. Blood streamed from his wounds, pooling dark on the ground. "Elara, you traitorous whelp!" he spat, clutching his arm. "The Alpha will skin you for this, and that abomination with you." His eyes darted to the wolf, which stood unmoving now, chest rising and falling steadily, as if the fight had been no more than a passing breeze. The betas whimpered behind him, shifting uneasily, their instincts screaming of a dominance they couldn't challenge. Elara's legs trembled, but she didn't drop her gaze. The bond thrummed between her and the wolf, an invisible tether warming her veins like embers in winter frost. "Go," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Tell them I chose the wild." It was madness. Defiance born from the depths of her isolation, the years of sidelong glances, of being the soft one, the breaker of lines in hunts she could never join. Thorn's laugh was bitter, choked with pain. "You'll beg to return when the silent ones tear you apart." He turned, signaling his betas with a sharp jerk of his head, and they melted into the shadows, their scents fading like smoke on the wind. The ruins fell silent once more, save for the distant drip of water from ivy-draped arches and Elara's ragged breaths. The wolf turned to her then, its golden eyes softening, almost weary. It padded closer, nostrils flaring as it scented the thin cuts on her cheeks from the branches. A low whine escaped its throat, the first sound she'd heard from it, vibrating through her like a secret shared. She reached out again, this time letting her fingers brush its muzzle, warm, real, pulsing with life that hummed against her palm. In that touch, visions flickered unbidden, flashes of endless forests under blood moons, a crown of thorns woven from silver fur, a king fallen not by blade but by betrayal. The wolf pulled back gently, nosing her hand away, then turned toward the far edge of the ruins, where the mist parted like a veil. Elara followed without question, her bare feet numb on the uneven stone. The path wound downward, away from the altar, into a ravine where the trees leaned inward like conspirators. Moonlight filtered through the canopy in silver shafts, illuminating clusters of luminescent fungi that glowed like fallen stars. The air grew heavier here, saturated with the scent of moss and something sharper, ozone, like the prelude to a storm. As they descended, Elara's wolf stirred restlessly within her, claws scraping at the cage of her skin. She'd always suppressed the shift, fearing the weakness it revealed, a smaller form, sleeker but no match for the Alpha's bulk. But tonight, under the waxing moon's gaze, the urge felt different, stronger, laced with the silent wolf's essence. "Who are you?" she whispered again, the words hanging in the damp air. The wolf glanced back, its pace unhurried, leading her to a hidden grotto where a stream carved through the earth, its waters black and murmuring secrets. There, in the grotto's embrace, the wolf stopped. The mist swirled thicker, coiling around them like living smoke, and Elara felt the pull intensify, a magnetic draw that made her knees buckle. She sank to the mossy bank, watching as the wolf's form shimmered, edges blurring under the moon's light. Was this the curse her mother had whispered of? The blood moon's gift, twisting Omegas into something more? Her heart ached with a loneliness she'd carried like a stone. now cracking open to reveal a void hungry for truth. The wolf approached the stream, dipping its head to drink, and in the reflection of the water, Elara saw not just the beast, but a shadow of a man. Tall, broad-shouldered, with hair like storm clouds and eyes that held the weight of lost kingdoms. She gasped, the sound echoing off the grotto walls. The wolf lifted its head, water dripping from its jaws, and for a heartbeat, the air crackled with unspoken power. It didn't shift fully, not yet, but the hint was there, a promise etched in gold. He was no mere guardian, but something ancient, an alpha unbound by pacts, waiting for the one who could claim his throne. Elara's fingers dug into the earth, grounding herself against the surge of emotion, fear, awe, a budding fierce protectiveness. The pack's hunters would return, fiercer now, driven by Thorn's wounded pride. But here, in this hidden heart of the wild, she felt the first stirrings of her own power, fragile as a fledgling flame. The wolf nudged her shoulder gently, urging her onward, and she rose, the bond tightening like roots seeking soil. The night stretched before them, full of perils and revelations, and as they left the grotto behind, Elara knew the path ahead would demand more than survival. It would carve her into the Omega who followed no longer, but led. The ravine twisted like a serpent's spine, its walls sheer and slick with moss that wept rivulets of water into the stream below. Elara trailed the silent wolf, her steps lighter now, as if the earth itself conspired to cushion her path. The moon hung higher, its light fracturing through the canopy in jagged patterns that danced across the wolf's coat, turning each hair to threads of silver. The air hummed with the grotto's lingering magic, a faint vibration that seeped into her bones, stirring her inner wolf from its uneasy slumber. She could feel it now, not as a whisper, but as a growl building in her chest, hungry for release. They emerged from the narrow pass into a broader hollow, where the forest opened its arms to reveal a forgotten glade. Ancient oaks ringed the space, their trunks gnarled and etched with symbols that pulsed faintly, like veins under skin. In the center stood a massive stone archway, half collapsed, its keystone cracked but defiant against the sky. Vines choked the ruins, blooming with nightshade flowers that released a sweet, poisonous perfume on the breeze. Elara's nostrils flared. The scent was intoxicating, laced with the wild's promise and peril. Her skin prickled, not from cold, but from the awareness that this place was no mere sanctuary. It was a threshold, where the veil between beast and spirit thinned to a razor's edge. The wolf paused at the archway, its ears swiveling toward the shadows beyond. Elara halted too, her breath sinking with the creature's steady rhythm. "What waits here?" she murmured, the words slipping out like a confession. No answer came, but the wolf's golden eyes met hers, holding a depth that pulled at her soul. Centuries of exile, of watching packs rise and crumble under the weight of their own greed. She wondered, fleetingly, if he too had once been bound by chains like hers, an alpha reduced to silence by betrayal's cruel hand. A low rumble echoed from the tree line, not thunder but something older, the earth's lament. The ground trembled subtly, and Elara's wolf surged forward, claws itching against her resolve. She clenched her fists, nails biting into palms, drawing pinpricks of blood that scented the air. The pack's lore spoke of such places, ley lines where the moon's power converged, awakening dormant blood. Omegas like her were warned away, lest their softness twist into something uncontrollable. But control had never been her gift. Survival had. The wolf stepped through the archway, and Elara followed, the stone cool under her touch as she steadied herself against it. On the other side, the glade transformed. Mist rose from hidden springs, swirling into shapes that evoked ghosts, ethereal forms of wolves long gone, their eyes hollow sockets of regret. The air thickened with whispers, fragments of ancient tongues that brushed her mind like feathers, claim what was lost, or perish in the echo. Her heart stuttered, visions flickering at the edges of sight. Battles under crimson skies, a throne of bone and fur toppled by kin, a king who chose solitude over slaughter. She shook her head, grounding herself in the wolf's presence. He moved to the glade's heart, where a crystal-clear pool mirrored the stars, undisturbed save for ripples from unseen depths. Circling it slowly, he lowered his head, muzzle nearly touching the water. Elara approached cautiously, kneeling at the edge. Her reflection stared back, pale and wide-eyed, but beneath it the water stirred, revealing layers. Her mother's face, weary from labor, the pack's alpha, his sneer eternal. And then, impossibly, her own form shifting, fur rippling across skin, eyes igniting to gold. A shadow fell across the pool. From the mist, figures materialized, not hunters, but specters. They were wolves, translucent and ragged, their forms flickering like candle flames in wind. One stepped forward, larger than the rest, its coat faded silver, eyes the same burning gold as her silent guide. A phantom alpha, perhaps the first of his line, bound here by unfinished oaths. "Daughter of the blood moon," it rasped, voice like cracking ice in her mind. "The curse awakens. Will you bear it or break it?" Elara recoiled, splashing the water, but the wolf, her wolf, nudged her side, a firm press that anchored her. The spectres closed in, their presence a chill that seeped into her marrow. They weren't hostile, not yet, but demanding, their forms weaving stories of sacrifice, alphas who had ruled with iron paws, only to fall to the very omegas they scorned. One phantom brushed against her arm, and pain lanced through her, an echo of wounds not her own, gashes from silver blades forged in betrayal. She gasped, tasting blood on her tongue, her body convulsing as her wolf clawed to the surface. "No, I can't." The words escaped in a sob, but the silent wolf stood firm, his body a shield. He let out that low whine again, deeper now, resonating with the glade's magic. The spectres paused, their eyes turning to him. Recognition dawned in their ethereal gazes. The lost king, the alpha who had vanished into legend, his silence a vow against the pack's endless wars. One by one, they bowed their heads, dissolving into mist that funneled toward the pool, feeding its glow until it blazed like a captive sun. Elara's vision blurred, tears mixing with the supernatural sweat beading on her skin. The bond between her and the wolf tightened, pulling her under. She felt his essence flood her, memories not hers, of a crown heavy as chains, of love poisoned by ambition, of a shift that severed him from his throne. He had been Kyle once, Alpha King of the United Packs, felled by his brother's blade under a false eclipse. Cursed to wander as beast until an Omega's pure heart could reclaim what was shattered. The realization hit like a storm, her body arching as the shift began in earnest. Fur prickled along her arms, bones lengthening with a fire that burned away doubt. But it wasn't full, not yet. The moon's light waned slightly, holding her in limbo, a half-form trembling on the glade's edge. The wolf, no, Kyle, pressed against her, sharing his strength, his golden eyes promising, "You are the key, Elara. The Omega who follows becomes the one who commands." From the tree line, a new threat stirred, real this time, not spectral. Howls pierced the night closer than before. Thorn's reinforcements drawn by the glade's awakening power. The pack had sensed the disturbance, their alpha mobilizing the full hunt. Elara rose unsteadily, her partial shift lending her claws and heightened senses, the world sharpening to predatory clarity. Fear twisted into resolve, a quiet fury blooming in her chest. The silent wolf, no longer just guardian but partner, flanked her ready. As the first hunters burst into the glade, eyes wild with the thrill of pursuit, Elara stepped forward, her voice a low growl that echoed the ancient whispers. "This ends tonight." The battle lines drew, mist coiling like allies around them, and in that moment, the Omega's loneliness fractured, revealing the Alpha's fire within. The path to her transformation stretched onward, paved with blood and starlight, but for the first time, she ran not in flight, but toward destiny's roar. The howls shattered the glade's fragile peace, a chorus of fury that ripped through the mist like claws through flesh. Elara's partial shift held her in a fevered limbo, fingers elongated into talons, fur mottling her arms in patches of midnight grey, her senses exploding into hyperclarity. The world sharpened, the acrid tang of the hunter's sweat, the thunder of their paws against the earth, the metallic undercurrent of their intent to drag her back into submission. 10 strong, they poured through the archway, led by the pack's alpha himself, Rorik, a hulking brute with fur like rusted iron and eyes that burned with the entitlement of unchallenged rule. Thorn limped at his flank, his wounds hastily bandaged, a snarl twisting his muzzle. Kyle, the silent wolf, the fallen king, bristled beside her, his massive form a wall of coiled power, golden eyes locked on the intruders. No sound escaped him, but his presence roared through their bond, a surge of ancient strength that flooded Elara's veins like liquid fire. She felt it now, fully, not just a tether but a merging, his memories bleeding into hers in fragmented pulses. A throne room awash in blood, a brother's betrayal under eclipse shadows, the curse's bite twisting man into beast. "Fight with me," his essence whispered. Not in words, but in the raw pulse of shared will. For the first time, the Omega's fear didn't crush her. It fueled her, twisting into a snarl that rumbled from her throat, surprising even herself. Rorik skidded to a halt at the glade's edge, his betas fanning out in a semicircle, cutting off escape. The pool's glow illuminated their forms, casting long shadows that writhed like living things. "Elara," he growled, voice deep and resonant, carrying the weight of his dominance. "You've awakened what should sleep. Come quietly, or we'll end this farce here." His gaze flicked to Kale, recognition flickering, legends of the silent wanderer, the ghost alpha who haunted borders. But Rorik was no pup to cower at tales. He was the pack's iron fist, the one who'd crushed uprisings and claimed Omegas like prizes. She didn't bow her head, as she once would have. Instead, Elara stepped forward, claws flexing in the damp earth, the nightshade's perfume clinging to her like a cloak. "No more chains, Rorik. The wild chose me." The words tasted foreign, bold, but true, born from the glade's whispers and Kale's unyielding gaze. The spectre's echoes lingered in her mind. Bear it or break it. Her body ached with the incomplete shift, bones grinding as her wolf demanded full release, but she held it, channeling the pain into focus. The alpha laughed, a guttural bark that echoed off the oaks. An Omega playing at power. Pathetic. He lunged first, a blur of muscle and malice, aiming to bowl her over and reassert his rule. But Kale intercepted, meeting him mid-stride with a clash that shook the ground. Fangs sank into shoulder, claws raked ribs, blood sprayed the pool, turning its surface to crimson ripples. The betas surged then, a wave crashing against Elara's fragile resolve. She dodged the first, her heightened agility saving her from jaws that snapped inches from her throat. Pain bloomed as another's paw clipped her side, tearing fabric and skin, but she countered with a swipe that drew blood from a beta's muzzle. It yelped, recoiling, shock widening its eyes at the fight in her. The glade devolved into chaos, bodies twisting in the mist, growls mingling with the snap of branches under falling forms. Elara fought like a cornered flame, her partial shift lending ferocity she never knew, leaping onto a beta's back, talons digging into fur as she rode it down, her weight forcing it to the ground. Thorn circled her, waiting for weakness, his earlier humiliation fueling a vicious gleam. "You'll pay for that, whelp," he snarled. shifting to human mid-prowl, drawing a silver dagger from his belt, the pack's bane for strays and curses alike. Kale's battle with Rorik raged at the pool's edge, the water churning as they tumbled in, emerging soaked and savage. The Alpha's bulk pressed advantage, pinning Kyle momentarily, but the silent wolf twisted free with a burst of otherworldly speed, his bite finding Rorik's throat, not to kill, but to warn, drawing a spray that stained the nightshade blooms. Through the bond, Elara felt Kyle's restraint, his weariness of endless slaughter, and it mirrored her own. This wasn't just survival. It was a stand against the cycle that had broken them both. Thorn struck then, dagger flashing toward Elara's back as she dispatched another baiter. She spun, the blade grazing her arm, searing like icefire, Silver's curse biting deep, slowing her shift. Pain lanced through her, vision blurring, but Kale's essence surged, a protective roar in her mind that steadied her. She kicked out, her clawed foot connecting with Thorn's knee, the crack echoing as he crumpled. "Traitor!" he gasped, but she loomed over him, her voice a hybrid growl. "No! Free!" Rorik broke away from Kyle, bellowing orders as the tide turned, half his hunters down or fleeing into the mist, tails low. The glade's magic amplified the fray, vines snaking from the oaks to ensnare paws, the pool's light pulsing in rhythm with Elara's heartbeat. The Alpha shifted to human form, chest heaving, blood tracing rivulets down his torso. "What are you?" he demanded, eyes on Kale, who stood guard over her, unmoving but radiating command. Elara met his stare, the silver wound throbbing but her will unbroken. "The end of your reign." The words hung heavy, laced with the spectre's prophecy. Rorik hesitated, the pack's fractures showing in his baiter's uneasy whines. Then, with a final snarl, he retreated, dragging Thorn with him, the survivors melting into the shadows like defeated ghosts. The glade fell quiet, save for the drip of water and Elara's labored breaths. She collapsed to her knees by the pool, the silver's burns spreading like frost in her veins, sapping her strength. Kyle nuzzled her side, his warmth a balm, licking the wound with a gentleness that belied his ferocity. The bond deepened in that touch, visions clarifying, Kale's full form, the Alpha King rising from curse under a true eclipse with her at his side, not as Omega, but equal. Tears stung her eyes, mixing with blood and mist. Loneliness had been her shadow, but now it fractured, revealing purpose, a destiny woven from sacrifice, where her softness became the blade to sever old chains. The moon dipped lower, urging rest, but peril lingered. The pack would regroup, their hunt fiercer. Kyle lifted his head, golden eyes scanning the tree line, then nudged her toward the archway. Elara rose, leaning on him, the glade's glow fading behind them like a closing eye. The path ahead wound deeper into the wild, toward ruins older than packs, where her transformation would demand the ultimate price. But as they vanished into the night, her partial shift receding to leave scars that pulsed with promise, Elara felt the stir of hope amid the ache, a quiet certainty that following the silent wolf had awakened not just power, but a heart fierce enough to claim a crown. The night swallowed them whole as they pressed deeper into the wild, the glade's fading glow, a distant memory swallowed by encroaching shadows. Elara's arm throbbed where the silver dagger had kissed her skin, a burning line that snaked up her bicep like veins of frost, sapping the warmth from her limbs. She leaned into Kale's flank, his fur a rough anchor against the chill that seeped from the earth, each step a labored echo of the battle's toll. The forest here was older, more unforgiving, trees like ancient sentinels, their branches interlocking overhead to form a tunnel of gnarled wood, roots twisting across the path like the fingers of buried kings grasping for one last breath. Moonlight pierced the canopy in thin silver needles, illuminating motes of mist that danced like restless spirits. The air hung heavy with the scent of decaying leaves and something sharper, metallic, like blood long dried but never forgotten. Elara's partial shift had receded, leaving her human once more, but the wolf within paced restlessly, its presence a low hum in her blood. She glanced at Cale, his golden eyes scanning the darkness ahead, alert yet weary, as if the weight of centuries pressed on his shoulders. Through their bond, she caught fragments of his solitude. Endless nights, wandering borders, watching packs devour themselves in cycles of dominance and despair. "Why me?" she thought, the question a silent plea along their tether. His only response was a gentle nudge, urging her forward, his silence a vow more eloquent than words. The path descended into a valley cradled by jagged cliffs, where the wind whispered through crevices like the sighs of the forsaken. Ruins emerged from the undergrowth, crumbled walls of black stone veined with glowing runes, remnants of a time when alphas ruled not by fang, but by pact with the moon itself. This was the heart of the ancients, a place pack elders forbade in hushed tones, where the first curses were forged, binding kings to beasts for crimes against the balance. Elara's breath quickened, the silver wound pulsing in rhythm with the rune's faint light, as if it recognized kin. Her mother's dying words echoed in her mind. "The blood moon claims its own, child. It will unmake you to remake the world." She dismissed them as fevered ramblings, but now they clawed at her, stirring guilt for the pack she'd left bleeding in the glade. Were they monsters, or merely echoes of her own suppressed rage? Cale slowed at the valley's edge, his ears flattening as a low rumble vibrated through the ground. Not thunder, but the awakening of something vast and subterranean. The mist thickened, coiling around their legs like curious serpents, and from the ruins rose a chorus of ethereal howls, not hostile but mournful, as if the stones themselves grieved. Elara's skin prickled, her wolf whining internally at the pull of old magic. She sank to one knee beside a fallen pillar, fingers tracing the etched symbols. Wolves entwined in eternal chase, a crown shattered at their paws. Visions assaulted her through the bond, Cale's past sharpening into focus. He had been the unifier, the alpha king who forged peace from warring clans, only for his brother to poison the well of trust with ambition's blade. The curse had stripped him of voice and throne, dooming him to guide the worthy from the shadows. "I see you now," she whispered, tears blurring the runes. All of it, the betrayal, the endless watch. Kyle turned, his muzzle brushing her cheek, warm breath chasing away the chill. In that touch, tenderness bloomed amid the ache, a quiet love impossible yet inevitable, born not of lust, but shared scars. But the moment shattered as the ground split, a fissure yawning open like a wound, releasing a plume of spectral fog. From its depths emerged guardians, not wolves, but wraiths of mist and bone, skeletal forms cloaked in tattered fur, eyes hollow voids that sucked light from the air. Cursed sentinels, bound to protect the heart from the unworthy, their forms shifting between beast and decay. The first lunged, a whirlwind of claws that raked the earth where Elara had knelt moments before. Kyle met it head-on, his body slamming into the wraith with a force that dispersed its mist momentarily, only for it to reform, with a shriek that pierced her ears. Elara scrambled back, the silver wound flaring, weakening her shift. Two more wraiths circled her, their bony jaws clacking like dry branches, whispers slithering into her mind. Unworthy Omega. Return to submission. Doubt clawed at her, visions of her pack's sneers, her mother's lifeless eyes, the loneliness that had defined her. Was this her destiny, to follow only to fall? But Kyle's bond surged, a flood of his strength bolstering her. She rose, ignoring the burn, and let her wolf rise partially once more, claws extending, senses honing to lethal edges. The nearest wraith struck, its ethereal form phasing through her guard, chilling her to the core, frost blooming on her skin where it touched. Pain lanced deep, evoking buried traumas. the hunts where she'd cowered, the alphas who'd dismissed her as fragile. With a cry that blended sob and snarl, she countered, talons slashing through mist, disrupting its form enough to send it recoiling. Kyle dispatched another, his fangs tearing at spectral flesh that dissolved into harmless vapor, but more rose from the fissure, endless, tireless, feeding on her doubts. The battle blurred into frenzy, Elara dodging and striking, her body a vessel for the wild's fury. One wraith latched onto her leg, dragging her down, its whispers amplifying her guilt. You abandoned them, weak, always weak. She thrashed, tears freezing on her lashes, but Kyle was there, severing the hold with a protective leap. In the chaos, their bond deepened, his memories merging fully, the eclipse where he'd shifted for the last time as king, choosing exile over vengeance. Sacrifice for balance, it urged. Elara channeled it, her partial shift surging despite the silver's curse. Fur rippling fully across her arms as she tore into the lead wraith, her roar echoing the valley's lament. The guardians faltered, their forms flickering as the runes dimmed, recognizing the truth in her blood, the blood moon's heir, Omega no longer in spirit. The fissure sealed with a groan, the last wraith dissolving into the mist, leaving silence broken only by their heaving breaths. Elara collapsed against Kale, the silver wound now a livid scar, its poison halted by the magic's trial. Exhaustion warred with elation. She'd faced the abyss and emerged scarred but whole. He licked the mark gently, his golden eyes meeting hers with a depth that spoke of futures intertwined, love forged in shadow, a throne not of iron but of healed wounds. As dawn's first blush tainted the horizon, painting the ruins in hues of reluctant gold, they pressed on toward the heart's core, a shadowed temple where the final eclipse awaited. The pack's distant howls lingered on the wind, a reminder of pursuits unrelenting, but Elara walked taller, her steps synced with Kale's. The loneliness that had hollowed her now filled with purpose, a quiet fire promising redemption. In the wild's embrace, she glimpsed her reflection, not in water, but in his gaze, the Omega transformed, ready to claim what destiny demanded, even if it meant losing the Boy King's silence forever. The shadowed temple loomed at the valley's heart, like a beast crouched in eternal vigil, its spire's jagged teeth against the paling sky. Dawn's reluctant light filtered through the mist, casting the ruins in a wash of muted gold and grey, where vines clung to weathered stone like desperate fingers. Elara's steps faltered at the threshold, the silver scar on her arm a dull throb that echoed the pulse of the earth beneath her feet. Kyle padded ahead, his form a silhouette of quiet strength. But she sensed the tension in his frame, the subtle hitch in his gait, the way his golden eyes scanned the archways as if expecting ghosts to stir from every crack. The air inside the temple was thick, saturated with the scent of ancient incense and damp stone, mingled with the faint coppery tang of old blood. Pillars rose like the ribs of some colossal fallen creature, etched with runes that flickered to life under their passing, casting erratic shadows that danced across the walls. Elara's breath came shallow, her wolf stirring uneasily within, drawn to the chamber's core where a vast circular dais awaited, ringed by a moat of still black water. This was the eclipse sanctum, whispered in forbidden tales, the birthplace of curses, where the moon's veil thinned to reveal truths that could unmake souls. She followed Kyle onto the dais, the stone cool and unyielding under her bare soles, vibrating with a low hum that resonated in her chest. Visions tugged at the edges of her mind through their bond, Kyle's memories surfacing like submerged wreckage. The night of his betrayal, the eclipse's blood-red glow bathing his brother's triumphant grin as the blade sank home. Pain, raw and unrelenting, flooded her, twisting her gut with an empathy that bordered on her own agony. "It hurts," she whispered, sinking to her knees beside him, her fingers burying into his fur for anchor. He leaned into her touch, a low rumble vibrating from his throat, not a growl, but a soothing vibration that chased the chill from her bones. In that shared silence, tenderness bloomed, fragile as frost on a thorn, an impossible love, forged in the wild's unforgiving heart, where Omega and fallen king found solace in each other's scars. But the temple stirred, awakened by their presence. The water in the moat rippled without wind, shadows coalescing into forms that peeled from the walls, echoes of Kale's past, not spectres, but manifestations of the curse itself. They took shape as wolves, their coats ragged and eyes voids of endless night, circling the dais with predatory grace. One lunged at Kyle, jaws wide, but he met it with a clash of fangs, dispersing the shadow into wisps that reformed behind Elara. She twisted away, heart slamming, the silver scar flaring as if the curse recognized its kin. "They're part of you," she gasped, dodging another strike that grazed her shoulder, drawing a thin line of blood. Through the bond, she felt his turmoil. These were fragments of his shattered self, the rage and grief he'd suppressed in silence, now unleashed to test the one who sought to mend him. Ilara's wolf surged, partial shift rippling across her skin, claws extending, senses sharpening to the temple's symphony of whispers. She slashed at a shadow wolf, her talons passing through mist that burned like acid, evoking flashes of her own buried pains, the pack's cold shoulders, her mother's final, fevered embrace, the loneliness that had carved hollows in her spirit. One form pressed close, its void eyes boring into hers, murmuring illusions in her mind. "You are nothing without submission. He will consume you, as the curse consumes all." Doubt clawed deep, tears stinging her eyes, but Kale's essence flooded the bond, a steady warmth, his memories of unity before the fall, of pacts bound not by fear but by trust. She channeled it, her strike landing true this time, the shadow dissolving with a wail that echoed her own unresolved cries. The battle intensified, shadows multiplying as the dawn light strengthened, the moat's water churning into a vortex that pulled at their feet. Kyle fought like a tempest contained, his bites severing forms that reformed elsewhere. But exhaustion etched lines in his movements, the curse's toll, centuries of wandering wearing thin. Elara flanked him, their synergy instinctive. She drew their attention. He struck the killing blows, their bond a living thread weaving defense from desperation. A larger shadow emerged from the vortex, towering and regal, mirroring Kale's lost form. The brother who had wielded the blade, his spectral jaws dripping ethereal venom. It targeted her, recognizing the threat in her blood moon lineage, lunging with a force that bowled her into the dais' edge. Pain exploded through her ribs, the impact jarring, but as the shadow pinned her, its whispers turned venomous. "Sacrifice the king, or be sacrificed. Your softness dooms him." Visions assaulted her, Kyle fully shifted, throne reclaimed, but at the cost of her life. Her essence the key to break his curse. Love twisted into terror, the impossible pull between them a blade's edge. She thrashed, claws raking the shadow's underbelly, but it held, draining her warmth. Kyle roared silently, leaping to her aid, his fangs clamping onto the manifestation's throat. They tumbled together, shadow and wolf entwined, until Kyle's will shattered it, the vortex calming as the last echoes faded into the stone. Panting, Elara crawled to him, her hands trembling as she pressed against his heaving side. The temple quieted, runes pulsing softer now, as if appeased. Through the bond, she glimpsed the truth. The eclipse loomed at dusk, the final trial demanding loss, not death but surrender. To free Kale, she must yield her Omega's chains fully, merging her spirit in a rite that could scar them eternally. Tears traced her cheeks, mingling with sweat and blood, but resolve hardened in her chest. "Whatever it takes," she murmured, burying her face in his fur. He nuzzled her in return, golden eyes holding hers with a depth that promised eternity, even in ruin. Distant howls pierced the morning haze. The pack closing in, drawn by the temple's awakening. Rorik's forces, relentless, their scents carried on the wind like a promise of reckoning. Elara rose, the silver scar now a badge of endurance, her body aching but alive with purpose. Kyle stood beside her, the dais' center glowing faintly, awaiting the moon's return. The day stretched before them, a fragile reprieve laced with peril. As the wild's heart beat in sync with theirs, solitude had led her here, but destiny demanded more, a sacrifice born of love, where pain birthed not just power, but a new dawn for the broken. As the sun climbed, casting long shadows across the sanctum, Elara felt the stir of true strength, not in fangs or crowns, but in the quiet vow to stand, unyielding, at the fallen king's side. The sun traced its languid arc across the sky, bleeding crimson into the horizon, as dusk crept over the eclipsed sanctum like a thief in velvet shadows. Elara stood at the dais' edge, the black water of the moat now still as polished obsidian, reflecting the fading light in fractured glints. Her body ached from the morning's trials, the silver scar a constant whisper of fire along her arm. Her ribs bruised shadows beneath her skin, but the pain felt distant now, overshadowed by the bond's insistent pull. Kyle pressed close, his warmth a steady pulse against her side, his golden eyes fixed on the temple's vaulted ceiling, where cracks spider-webbed like veins, waiting for the moon's emergence. The air thickened with anticipation, heavy as the incense of forgotten rites, carrying the distant thunder of approaching pause. Rorik's pack had scented the disturbance, their howls a relentless tide swelling from the valley's rim, drawn by the sanctum's awakening like moths to a dying flame. Elara's wolf stirred within her, no longer a caged whisper but a fierce companion, urging her toward the dais' heart, where the runes pulsed brighter, syncing with her heartbeat. She glanced at Kale, tracing the noble line of his muzzle, the subtle scars hidden in his fur, marks of a king who had chosen silence over slaughter. Their love, born in the wild's cruel cradle, was no gentle thing. It was a storm held in check, tender in its ferocity, promising eternity even as it demanded everything. "We face this together," she murmured, her voice a thread in the gathering dusk. He nuzzled her palm, the touch igniting sparks along their bond. Flashes of his lost kingdom, packs united under starlit pacts, now dust in the wind of betrayal. The eclipse began subtly, the moon's edge kissing the sun's rim, casting the temple in an eerie half-light where shadows lengthened into claws. The moat stirred, ripples blooming like breaths from submerged depths, and the runes ignited fully, bathing the dais in ethereal silver laced with blood-red veins. Pain lanced through Elara as the rite took hold, the curse recognizing her blood-moon lineage. She gasped, dropping to her knees on the cold stone, her body convulsing as the Omega's chains, years of submission, of sidelong glances and suppressed howls, clawed to the surface. Visions overwhelmed her, her mother's labor under that fateful sky, the pack's alpha sneering at her birth, the loneliness that had hollowed her like a winter gale. "It burns!" she cried, fingers digging into the dais, drawing blood that seeped into the runes. Kale circled her protectively, his whine a low vibration that anchored her soul, sharing his own torment. The blade's bite, the shift that stole his voice, dooming him to wander as guardian to the lost. The bond tightened like a noose, pulling her essence toward his. To break the curse, she must lose the part of herself that defined her weakness, the Omega's yielding heart, merging it with his fractured kingship in a sacrifice of self. Tears carved paths down her cheeks, mixing with sweat, as her wolf surged fully for the first time, bones lengthening, fur erupting in a cascade of midnight grey, her form shifting into something sleek and powerful, no longer small but regal in its grace. Agony twisted through her, a fire that remade her from within, stripping away the chains to reveal the Alpha's fire she'd always carried, buried under layers of duty and disdain. Kyle's form shimmered in response, the eclipse's peak blotting the sun entirely, plunging the sanctum into twilight's embrace. His body arched, muscles rippling as the curse fractured, fur receding, limbs elongating into human sinew, until he rose beside her. Tall, broad-shouldered, with storm-cloud hair falling wild over piercing golden eyes. Naked and scarred, the Alpha King stood reborn, his voice a gravelly rumble that shattered centuries of silence. "Elara," he said, the name a benediction, his hand cupping her shifting muzzle with trembling reverence. She completed her transformation mid-gasp, human once more, but changed, taller, her eyes flickering with gold, the silver scar now a luminous vein of power tracing her arm. Their gazes locked, a silent vow passing between them. Love impossible no longer, but forged in the forge of loss. She had given her submission, he his isolation. Together they were whole. But joy curdled as the temple's outer arches shuddered, Rorik's pack bursting through, a tide of fangs and fury, the Alpha at their fore, eyes widening at the sight of the risen king. "Impossible!" Rorik snarled, skidding to a halt, his betas fanning out with hesitant growls. The eclipse's shadow amplified the sanctum's magic, vines erupting from the stone to ensnare the front ranks, the moat boiling with spectral warnings. Kyle stepped forward, Elara at his side, their hands clasped, a united front that rippled through the pack like a shockwave. His voice boomed, resonant with reclaimed authority. "The cycle ends. No more wars for thrones stained in kin's blood." Rorik lunged, defiance twisting his features, but Kyle met him not with claws, but command, a Alpha's roar that bent the air, forcing the brute to his knees. The betas whimpered, instincts yielding to the ancient power, fractures in their loyalty cracking wide. Thorn, at the rear, dropped his gaze first, the enforcer's pride crumbling under the weight of truth. Violence flickered, a few loyalists charging, only to be felled by Elara's swift strikes, her new strength a blend of Omega's grace and King's resolve. Blood misted the air, but it was swift, purposeful, not the endless slaughter of old. Rorik rose, snarling, but Kale's hand on his shoulder stilled him, golden eyes piercing. "Join us, or fade into legend's dust." The Alpha hesitated, the pack's howls faltering into uneasy silence, then bowed his head, not in defeat but recognition. The Wild had chosen its rulers anew. As the eclipse waned, sunlight piercing the gloom like hesitant fingers, the temple quieted. Elara traced the fresh scars on Kale's chest, mirrors to her own, symbols of rebirth amid ruin. He pulled her close, their foreheads touching in a gesture soft as dawn's breath, the bond now a river of shared destiny. The pack dispersed into the valley, not as conquerors but pilgrims, whispers of unity spreading on the wind. Solitude's shadow lingered, a reminder of pains endured, but hope bloomed in its wake. A quiet strength, love's tender violence yielding to purpose. In the sanctum's heart, under the returning stars, Elara gazed at the horizon where night bled into day, a symbolic dawn etching promise across the wild. They had lost chains and voices, gained crowns of spirit. In sacrifice they found not just power, but each other, Omegas and Kings, remade in the moon's forgiving light. The forest sighed around them, ancient and alive, as they stepped into the future, hand in hand, the silent wolf no more, but the Alpha's roar, echoing eternal.